Let us continue with the global fascination with what's happening in North Africa and the Middle East. Oil prices escalating. It's raising fears as to what this is going to mean for global recovery, what this is going to mean for Africa. Should we be very worried?
Look, Lerata, it's obviously a difficult situation and a very dynamic and fluid situation. What you're seeing with the higher oil price is that global demand and global growth is going to soften. You've got a weak external environment as well, which is going to add further pressure. Looking at it from an African perspective, it's a bit of a mixed picture. The countries that are generally oil importers are going to experience some difficulty, especially in some of their key economic indicators. But by the same token, the net exporters of oil are set to benefit, in particular Angola, Nigeria, Ghana. And I think what's a key event now going forward is the Nigerian election, because Nigeria is the #1 crude oil exporter in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's going to have huge political and economic implications.
We'll talk about Nigeria in a second. Obviously, rising oil prices raises this looming threat of global inflation, and it's a threat that started to creep into Europe itself, and it's raising questions, like you're saying, about the global recovery. What is that going to mean tangibly for Africa? Yes, we've got an inflationary threat, but is it going to have greater bearing on our trade and investments coming onto the continent?
I think with the soft global environment, you've got problems in Japan, you've got a Eurozone crisis, which doesn't seem to have any end in sight. These are some of the key trading partners for the African continent. But at the same time, whilst there's limited opportunity in the developed world for growth, that means that investors need to look elsewhere for higher yields.
You talk about Nigeria, obviously, and what we've seen with the rising oil prices, speculators very, very active. Is this situation, the political situation in Nigeria, likely to compound what we're seeing just by way of what's happening to oil?
I think Nigeria is definitely a country to watch. RMB's view is that the election will go off relatively smoothly and that we'll see a new era of political maturity. I think the Niger Delta region, which is the key oil-producing region in the country, will not be affected. Obviously, you're going to get your typical election violence, your sporadic pockets here and there. But RMB's view is that it's not going to have a destabilizing effect on the country, and that Nigeria can actually benefit from the MENA crisis by increasing its oil production and helping it to improve some of its key economic indicators.
Yeah, and benefiting from the higher oil price. What about West Africa as a region? Because yes, whilst we're focused on Libya and events in Yemen unfolding, there is this pocket of problems in Cote d'Ivoire.
Certainly. I think the Ivory Coast situation, on the one hand, you've got a political fiasco over there. Ghana, on the other hand, you've got a stable country which is said to be one of the fastest growing, not only in Africa but in the world. They've just discovered oil in November, and that's just come online. So Nigeria is sandwiched somewhere in between. And as a region, I think the outcome of this Nigerian election is crucial for risk perception of the region as a whole and the way forward.
Risks, how would you define them? Because some would say, you know, short of implosion, we're going to see implications on our currencies, for instance, and some of our commodities as well, either going up or down.
The instability will definitely have an impact on commodities, particularly looking at the Ivory Coast. It's one of the bigger economies in the West African region. We've already seen cocoa prices spike significantly, and Ghana's actually, or as another cocoa producer, has benefited from this. So I think what you're looking at in the Ivory Coast is more a humanitarian crisis and the implications of that and managing that fallout.
I mean, obviously, you're quite preoccupied with West Africa. For any investors watching you right now, I mean, they're hearing mixed signals. Nigeria has a positive growth trajectory. The elections will be stable. Ghana's looking good. Ivory Coast represents a problem. If you had to sum up West Africa, what would you say?
Post-Nigerian elections, I think we're going to see the region in general, the Ivory Coast aside, set for strong economic growth. The fundamentals are there. And being generally an oil-producing region, I think it's set to benefit over the medium term.
And how's the rest of the continent going to benefit from this feel-good West Africa? And I'm talking here about things like African bonds, for instance, because we're seeing many governments launching their sovereign bonds internationally.
Nigeria, for example, is the second biggest economy on the African continent, and it has the potential to drive growth. We saw Nigeria launch its sovereign bond a couple of months ago, and that was very well subscribed, 2.5 times oversubscribed, in fact, which shows that there is appetite, and a lot of countries will look to follow suit going forward.
And in terms of investor perceptions of Africa, if they had to look at something like a Nigerian bond, I know one of the biggest arguments was, why are investors treating Africa like one thing, North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa? But unfortunately, that is the reality that's out there. Is there a sense that Africa is not a safe place to be doing business at the moment?
As I mentioned earlier, with limited opportunities in the developed world, yields need to be found elsewhere. I think Africa, with its population size, favorable demographics, and strong fundamentals, is set for some very good economic growth going forward. And if it's not going to come from the developed world, where's it going to come from?